Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to ensure you never miss a new video from News Laundry.
Welcome to another episode of NL Interviews, and I'm here with Kushanava Choudhury, the author of The Epic City by Bloomsbury, which came out a month ago, which should be available on Amazon and Flipkart and pretty much fine bookstores near us, right?
Right.
So give us a quick rundown of what your book is about, like the Twitter version, 114 characters.
Well, I'm not on Twitter, so this is not going to be a good exercise for me. But it's a mix of journalism and memoir, basically. I had lived in Calcutta as a kid, moved to the US, and then come back and worked as a newspaper reporter there for a couple of years at The Statesman.
And so you were at The Statesman in 2001?
1 to 3, yeah.
Okay, how old were you at that point?
I was 22.
All right,
22
okay, so 22 at one of the largest, I think, in the city, one of the oldest papers.
Yes, yeah.
So there's that section I'd mentioned earlier where you first meet Michael, who's kind of this idea of what I think maybe the romanticized version of what like a newspaper office looks like.
Right.
And I blame like the spotlights of the world, right?
Right.
Look at this very pristine, structured thing. But yeah, what was that like in 2001?
It was crazy.
Because that was your first time in any form of reporting or journalism, not even like student papers?
No. In the US, I had worked in papers since I was maybe 14. School paper, town paper, college paper, I'd interned at the Times in the US,
okay.
And then I had, the summer after my sophomore year, my second year of college, I had worked at The Statesman. My family had come to Calcutta on a visit, and I had to do something, and so I thought, okay, the thing was to do like an internship, right? So I did an internship at The Statesman. And once I did that, there was nothing, I think there was nothing else that, nothing was going to be more interesting than that, to work at a newspaper there, because it was a crazy place. It was a place, The Statesman was, just the building itself was this gigantic building right in the center of Calcutta, 4 floors. You go down, the press is right there. You walk in, the press is right there. Then there's, like floors upon floors of just like a mini city of people who are clerks and accountants and this and that, and you go in here and then there's another, a little floor and a mezzanine and this and that. It's a whole labyrinth in there. And there'd be like cats patrolling the corridors.
Okay. So one of those is not like the others, of course.
Cats. And then there'd be those guys who were the peons, literally peons, people who, you would press a button underneath your desk and this guy would show up and he would take the paper from your desk to the guy in the next room.
Oh, wow.
And there were more of them than there were of us, meaning reporters,
Did you have a beat? Like you were a reporter, obviously.
So I worked in features. I was a reporter in features, which is the supplement section. So it was there were 7 weekly supplements. I reported for all of them. So, so that was great in a lot of ways because I got to report on politics, sports,
and the fact that you were new to this wasn't even a problem. Or is there just no better way to learn, really?
Yeah, there's no better way to learn. I was new to this in the sense that, like I said, I'd been working in newspapers for my entire sort of conscious.
But West Bengal politics, especially.
Yeah. That all that stuff I was new to.
Especially like 2000, like right at the, like I think that would have been the peak of liberalization, right? Or right after the ebb?
Yeah, in Bengal, I think it was like it came slow, it came late, and we were clearly not on the front end of it. We were the people who were losing out. So we used to always say that our readers are dying by the day. We literally we're like liberalization.
Sorry, readers or readership? This is
both.
Oh, okay.
Because it would be like old people reading The Statesman who
Pay to keep news for you guys before you push off this mortal coil. Sorry.
Yeah, we couldn't read, these people, I say this because, at that time, I think now it has changed. At that time, there was a real culture of letter writing to newspapers. There were people who were almost like professional letter writers. They had been,
we started recognizing names after a while?
Yeah, of course. Deepak Baisak, just the name that came off the top of my head. B-Y-S-A-K, which is a very weird name to pronounce.
It's been 17 years since you worked there. That's a name you remember.
I just remember that. That's a kind of weird way to spell that last name, some weird like anglicized way. But there were lots of people like that who would write in, week in, week out. And they had probably been doing that for 20 years or 30 years.
What would they write about, though?
I don't know. Honorable Sir, I'm, surprised this esteemed newspaper has, whatever, you know, fallen upon. You
Oh,
know.
so the equivalent of our modern day comment section was just this, you know,
Yes.
well-written, postage stamped note. Okay.
Yeah, but see, the comment section, people feel like they can just come out in like their underpants. You know, this has a kind of form, and there's a kind of, you know, I mean, these people really took this seriously. They really thought they would write letters thinking that, you know, that writing letters to the editor made a difference. You know, you could actually, you know, change things by
I feel like we've gone awfully depressing. And you don't think it did, though?
Oh, maybe it did. I don't think the people who write on comment sections think that it's going to change anything. I think they're just fighting.
Yeah, this is true. I think.
But those guys are dead. I mean, nobody's doing that anymore. That culture is gone, I think, in newspapers, of people, professional letter writers.
But that's fair. Like, if this is a thing you've been reading for, you know, years on years, then you have very strong feelings, and you've probably been around longer than half the people on the masthead.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's the thing. I think with the era of new media, we're seeing less of. Has that system ever evolved, though? Or
What?
Like like the Statesman, or like that style of.
No, the
you know,
Statesman.
reporting, having an editor have to punch out a dude, which is a thing that does happen.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't think you could do that now. That system is, you know, I mean, the Statesman now, I mean, is a, you know, I mean, when I was there, that was sort of, at least what we understood was that that was still the largest selling paper in English paper in Calcutta. At one point, it was the largest selling English paper in Asia, you know.
Right. I think like 1875 is when they were founded. Is that right?
Something like that. It was first called the Englishman, then it was called the Statesman, and you know, it has a very long and storied history. I mean, if you read like Mike Davis's Late Victorian Holocaust, for instance, you know, where he writes about all these famines in the Victorian era in the 1880s and 90s, all of his sources are from the Statesman. The Statesman would just send these reporters out to central India where people were starving to death and just send them out there and just leave them there for like 3 months.
And so those are your primary sources even now?
This is what I'm saying. Mike Davis's primary sources, if you look at the footnotes, it's all Statesman sources.
See, and that's the thing that always concerns me, especially with new media, is like this fear of archive, this fear of forgetting and memory, right? I mean, because I guess like when you think of the age of the think piece, you don't necessarily, even though they're well cited and thoroughly researched, the idea of just having a stack to go through or microfiche to go through, like, does that mean, do you think it's just less likely we're going to be turning to like papers as like reference material, or more importantly, are we going to be less likely returning to like online things for reference material?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things, you know, like libraries are digitizing, I mean, this is kind of an aside, but, you know, libraries are just digitizing, but, I mean, it's a scary thought because digital technology changes so quickly. I mean, who's using Blu-ray discs or whatever?
But it also helps if you're looking with a kind of like surgical precision, right?
Yes,
whereas if you're like, look, let me get the paper for August 3rd, you know, 1914, you're like from page 1, I guess, to the very end, that's an entire sense of this is what's going on.
Yeah, the advertisements. I mean, I've gone through the archives.
Is that a thing I wonder?
Fascinating. Advertisements. That's much more interesting than actually the news in the paper. I mean, you see what people were selling and buying 100 years ago, you know.
Well, we don't know since we don't run ads.
We don't run ads. No, but I was saying, I mean, I remember going to the Statesman archives, you know, and looking at that stuff. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's in that sense, it's an enormous resource. I mean, there weren't that many papers at that time in India, you know, and yeah, historians have used it. I read about that in the book also. I mean, we were talking about the famine in '43, you know, and they could do that in some ways more easily than the vernacular, I think, media because they were an English paper.
So there's a lot more agency, but there's also a lot more money involved, or is that just that they were more more thorough because they were being read so much more?
Well, I think they also had a certain amount of freedom because it was run by Englishmen.
Okay, so you have the very people running the country also running this paper.
Yeah, so they, I think, had a little bit more leeway in certain ways, and they had this reputation for not being partisan. So during the famine, they're the people who broke the story that there was actually a famine. They had, you know, at that time.
Oh wait, I did not know this. Okay.
Yeah, because there was it was during war, right? So they had sort of blanket censorship of the newspapers, of print media. So what they did was to get around that, they just printed photo essays of people starving in the streets, pages upon pages of pictures of people dying literally, you know, in the streets.
This sounds incredibly subversive.
Yeah, that was the way they dealt with it. And they said, what are you going to do, you know? Shut us down? They didn't shut them down, they couldn't. It was the biggest paper, you know. And that record is still there.
Because but as you mentioned earlier, because the Bengal famine is a thing that we all know about, but we don't know it graphically, and we certainly don't know the extent of it. Because it's a thing that happened, not that it's a state-sponsored event, right? I'm a little curious about like that kind of, because I guess when you have primary sources reporting on a day-to-day basis, then there's really not much kind of erroneous history, or I guess, for want of a better word, changing or shifting of narratives, right? Or like or hashtag fake news. Right.
No, I think that's true. I mean, especially because we don't really memorialize things in this country. Like, it's not like we don't memorialize most things. We don't have there's a monument, if you go to Berlin, every place that they picked up Jews to go, to concentration camps, there's a little plaque you can see, and they'll give you the names of the people in that house, and so and so and so and so, and how many people were taken from that one house. If you did that for, what happened in this country at partition. I mean, think about the city of Delhi, right? If we actually had a plaque.
A lot of markers.
Yeah, I mean, so we have no kind of memorials.
So is that willful forgetting, you think, or is it kind of an oversight, or just a cultural miasma?
I think, the newspaper as a record, is extremely important there, because the newspaper at least was there recording, even if nobody made a monument and history hasn't remembered, the newspaper has remembered, right? That documentation is there. I think that's true of all of these events. Now, why are they not remembered? I mean, that's why don't we have a memorial to what happened in this city in 1984? We don't. As far as I know, to this day, we don't.
Well, I mean, a lot of that would be because it also seems a very open wound. Like, it's not a resolved issue. It's not even, you can't even say, look, it's a thing in the past. I mean,
it's still here.
I'm pretty confident pretty much everyone in this room that is probably not me was not even born then. But
it's very open, yeah. But I think all of it is very open. The partition stuff is very open. The famine stuff is very open, because, see, the problem with the famine is that it was a state-manufactured famine. That they knew at the time, everybody who lived through it knew. But the fact of the matter is that people, so what happened in the famine was that they moved grain, the war was on, and Churchill decided, I mean, there's a book about this, Madhusri Mukherjee's book, Churchill's Secret War.
Okay, right,
which is a great book about the high politics of famine. And then Janam Mukherjee's book, Hungry Bengal, which is kind of about the street level. And he goes through all the archives and looks at what was happening day to day. And he says to understand what partition, the riots that came out, partition came out of the riots in Calcutta in '46, the Great Calcutta Killing. And to understand the riots, his family had lost people in the riots. And he said, to understand the riots, you have to understand the famine, because what started in the famine, basically, this kind of inhumanity in the city, continued till '46. But the thing that I was going to say about that is that the problem with that is that everybody at that time knew that it was manufactured. Amartya Sen has a book about how there was no shortage of food in that sense. Food was about distribution.
It was diverted specifically away, right?
For the war, they even took all the boats so that people couldn't ship, because it's a riverine area, right?
Right, what's the term? Necropolitics. A population. It was decided a certain section of the population was not as valuable as another
section of the population. Yeah, so they were allowed to die. But the place where there was food was the city of Calcutta, because the British thought, that there was going to be an Eastern Front war with the Japanese. And it was very likely that there would be a war on Indian soil with the Japanese. And the center of war operations was Calcutta. And the Japanese did bomb Calcutta a couple times, the port and a couple other places. But they never marched to Calcutta, right? But the British thought that was going to be a front. And so their whole war operations in the East was centered in the city. So they had to make sure that not only were the British soldiers and the American soldiers fed, but all the bureaucracy, which were all natives, Indians, were all fed. So Calcutta was a place where there was food, and which means that the people who were Indians living in Calcutta, many of them were getting square meals a day while watching other people come from the countryside and starve to death on their doorstep. And that's the reason we can't remember it, because to remember it is also to remember
an inherent complicity. Well, then we could say the same about like 1984, especially in this city and with the government at the time.
Everybody in the neighborhoods, that's what people will tell you, right? In the
and it's funny that we're talking about that, because like Charlottesville is a great example of this tearing down of Confederate monuments.
That's right.
Right. And the argument is like, no, they're historical artifacts.
Right.
but there are also historical artifacts that are an extremely vile reminder. Like, where do you fall in on something like that? Because that's also remembering, but it's also
remembering,
now,
but it's also willfully forgetting certain things, right? Remembering, what are you remembering there?
right. There's a kind of not so much remembering as a kind of glorifying or romanticizing what was something that was inherently oppressive or evil.
Right. Yeah.
But then, do you think that those should be replaced with something else, or is it just enough to
remove?
Right.
You know, it's a funny thing. I mean, because I feel like in India we had that phase of politics.
We did have that phrase of renaming a lot.
Yeah, renaming everything and getting rid of all the statues in Calcutta. It was all full of English people statues. And the renaming in Calcutta is funny because I think in Bombay the same thing happened. A lot of the places, people just kept using the old names. Like even I will often use the old names.
Right.
Because they're sort of the popular culture retains the names, and so I think just removing statues and renaming things is clearly not enough. It's that makes people very happy. I mean, they're doing this now. Renaming. What did they just rename? Aurangzeb Road, Abdul Kalam Road. That pleases a constituency somewhere, but I think that confronting that history requires other kinds of steps.
But it's also, I mean, that's a conversation about, is naming a thing honoring a thing, or is it remembering a thing, and are the two, mutually exclusive or not, right?
Is naming a thing honoring it?
Right.
Yeah.
Because remembering it is not necessarily, I mean, remembering is not necessarily honoring things, right? Like if you're talking about like the Holocaust Memorial or even Jallianwala Bagh, that well is still maintained.
Well, they've memorialized that. That's actually honoring the memory of what happened there. You can go there, people,
And I think it's kind of important to see this lived experience of a thing instead of an abstract thing. And okay, just to bring us back home.
Well, this is all about this. Actually.
Right. I mean, no, there's this great line that struck me because it is simultaneously. I mean, it's either exceedingly naive or it's probably the only reason we all wake up and we go to work in an industry that everyone claims is, fake news and prostitutes are dying or whatever it is, and you say, like, at least in your early years, right, that 2001, 2003 period, you felt like your role as a reporter was you were bringing either justice, fairness, or water supply, which great turn of phrase, but that was what you were saying. Like it wasn't just that you were reporting, you were also imposing a sense of justice and fairness, and I mean,
you just felt like there was, I think that even if you were a kind of middle-class person, which whatever middle class is, is not really middle class, it's upper middle class, the privileged few who have an education, access to institutions. Even if you were that kind of a person, you always felt that you were vulnerable to terrible things happening,
Right, the greatest fear of owning stuff is someone will take your stuff.
Yeah, someone will take your stuff, terrible things will happen to you. You'll go to whatever, you'll work someplace 30 years and then they won't give you a pension and there's nothing you can do.
Although I feel like perhaps the inherent Bengali trend to panic over everything might have a little bit.
No. I mean, there is that also, but there's,
people from the South, we're horrifically stoic where everything bad will always happen. I mean, you treat every day like something horrible will happen.
Well, that's true, and people get through with it, get through that way, but terrible things, but terrible things happen to people on a daily basis. I mean, it's just, the thing is that if terrible things happen, you feel like there's nothing you can do. I know somebody, who died. I remember a relative of mine who went for some routine, gallbladder surgery or something, and just died, Now, if that happened in a different country, you could, file a lawsuit and, at least make sure that guy, who did that, didn't had his license revoked or whatever. Now, that did happen in Calcutta when a Bengali American whose wife died in a similar kind of situation. He actually pursued that case and used all of his resources, money and power, whatever, and he pursued that case for many, many years, a guy named Kunal Shah, I remember, and won. But the average person would never do that. You're just,
the inherent cost and time, and just above all the kind of energy required to.
So the thing is, in newspaper work, you feel like you could at least because
it's easy to get depressed. It's easy to wake up and wonder if any of this matters, right?
No, but newspaper work, this kind of small stuff. When a case comes to you, where some kind of wrongdoing has happened, usually you can seek redress. in some, because you can either sometimes just make a phone call and something will happen, or you can, write
I feel
400
like
words.
I was going to say, yeah, you ascribed a great amount of power to the press, which I've always felt was quite the opposite.
No, I mean, that's an
because
amazing power in this
that's what I
country.
was always wondering. Like, okay, we've written 1,200 words. Will it be read? Will it matter at the end of the day? But clearly, 22-year-old felt that, yeah, it did. Do you feel the same way now?
That kind of, I don't know. I don't know what kind of. I think it depends on the media, but I think newspapers that are read, see, what you can't do in a newspaper is make any kind of structural change. But that kind of change, where something has gone wrong and you can publicize it and finger the people who are responsible for it and somehow bring them to task, right?
So you're still speaking truth to power.
Yeah, at least in some very small way. Now, once you start doing that, a little bit, then you realize, okay, but you're still part of some larger system that you really have no power to change or any way to understand or, analyze in any meaningful way. That's what I felt, beyond a point, because you don't really understand. You're part of a larger circus.
Exactly, right.
But, I think that, look at what's happening now with the situation in Gorakhpur, right? With these kids dying. I'm sure that heads will roll one way or another because the media's on it, Now, maybe it'll take time, but, that's not nothing, That's not nothing. That's an important thing. People died there for no reason, and the people who were responsible for that.
But there's also this kind of criticism that says, like, oh, the media tends to blow things out of proportion.
Well, sure.
Of course, how you can blow the deaths of children out of proportion or just straight up negligence is beyond me. But trust me, someone will write in and tell us just that. It's the nature of the beast.
But the thing is that we should be living in a society where this kind of thing never happens. I don't think that's not a political position. It's just a normal, human position. Children should not be dying for no reason. And who is going to enforce that? I don't know any other institution. No college is going to enforce it. No political party is going to enforce it. It's only the media that can shine a light on those things. As far as I'm concerned, that's still true.
See, that's what I mean. I love that this optimism is still inherent, because by the time we get to the end of the book, and this is my favorite quote, of course, too. I think you say, and help me out if I'm misphrasing, it's like, revolutions eat their children?
Their children, right. Yeah. I think that's like Robespierre or something. It's not mine, it's not mine. From French Revolution, someone, yeah.
Well, the idea of Robespierre thinking of anyone as having children is frightening, but that's where I felt like we'd hit, like, pure Lorca.
But what's the revolution there? There's no revolution.
Well, you're seeing at least a kind of unity, where it's no longer seen as isolated instances of mistreatment or oppression, but they're seen as part of a larger systemic problem, right? And so people responding, like, even if you think of something like "Not in My Name," we're not, never mind how you feel about holding these protests or where they're held or the kind of people that attend, but the idea that it's being recognized that these are not singular instances, they're not random instances, they're all endemic of a problem. That's a revolution of sorts, or at least the inkling or start of one, you think?
That there's a destructive element that is always there within revolutions that has its ramifications in the next generation, So I'm the next generation of the post-Naxalite. So I was born in 1978. Naxalite movement basically was from, say, depending on when you count, but say 68, 69 to 72, 73, this is roughly the time. Very short period, actually. The pure Naxalite movement, from when the party was formed to when its leadership was massacred, is really short. And then the people were jailed or went into exile, and then they were let out when the communists came to power in 77. So I was born in the wake of that. Of course, nobody told us anything about that. Like, we don't remember anything publicly. We also don't remember, like in Calcutta, that whole phase is not remembered in any meaningful way.
But if you went back to the archives of the paper, would that have been?
Of course, yeah, of course. And, and certain very good books have been written about it now. Sumanta Banerjee, who was a statesman reporter, wrote one of the, In the Wake of Naxalbari, which is one of the key texts, who also later became a Naxalite, was a reporter who became a Naxalite, joined the movement, and then became sort of, left the movement also, was jailed. But the thing that I was going to say is that we who were born afterwards, our whole lives were structured by what happened in the Naxalite movement. But nobody told us. Like I was thinking about this. I was
So
writing.
you're living in the shadow of something you know nothing of.
You know nothing about. Yeah. It's like if your parents got divorced, and then you're like living in this. Actually, I don't even know if that's a good example. Like you're just like living with in these like two dysfunctional houses, and you have no idea why. You're just like living whatever.
Because Steve, that's in C2, right? It's always been this way.
Yeah, it's always been this way. And nobody explains why it happened this way or why it's not maybe the most ideal circumstance or why, like I'll give a very small example. The neighborhood where we used to live, I remember as a kid, if we were coming home late at night from somewhere, coming home late at night means, first of all, in Calcutta at that time, like after 9 o'clock was late at night, right? Things would just start people just empty the streets, which is in itself a strange thing in a big city. And then if you got a taxi, the taxi wouldn't want to come into our neighborhood. And I never understood that because there was nothing particularly unsafe about the neighborhood. There was nothing, The thing is that in the Naxalite movement, that was a dangerous neighborhood. There was Naxalite activity there. And so these guys were working off of that memory.
The rememory, right? That's a Toni Morrison thing, right? Right.
Yeah, it's like a memory. But nobody ever said that. Nobody said, like, I'm not going to go to your neighborhood because there's a Naxalite activity.
But that's so much of like 1984 in Delhi as well. Like there's certain neighborhoods that you distinctively remember being these epicenters of great violence. And you just, and even if you look around, it doesn't feel like it, but simultaneously it does, just the way it's shaped, the way, it's grown or been kept or not been kept or maintained. But there are these, if you know where to look for them, the wounds are there, I suppose.
If you know where to look, but there's no explicit acknowledgement. There's no
why
narrative.
Or where, right.
There's no, so that's the thing, and so you're entirely affected by that. Growing up in that kind of an environment, you're entirely affected, and you're screwed by that screwed in the sense of like, your life is kind of messed up because of that, I tell a very small story that, in the book, that I'd gone to Mexico City.
Right, that's where there was a tail end of that quote, right?
Yeah, probably that's what I think. Yeah, it was in Mexico City. They had this big student movement in '68 during the Mexico Olympics, and basically what happened in Mexico City is that there's this giant plaza, the Plaza de Tres Culturas, which is a plaza of three cultures. You've got Aztec and colonial and nationalist monuments there. And the police basically and they're apartment buildings. So the police basically surrounded that place, cut off all electricity, and then, went sort of high up in these apartment buildings, and then just massacred all these students who had protested there. And that was the end of the kind of revolutionary movement, And I think there's maybe one book that has come out, I don't know recently, but I think Elena Polonatowska, wrote a book about it, but there's not much.
I know Bolano talks about it obliquely.
Yes, Bolano, of course, because he's of that generation.
And it tinges everything, but Black Star is the only one where he specifically talks about that square.
And Amulet, where they talk about the massacre that happens in the university, which is the history of Mexico
right,
told.
Where he's talking about they see this person bend down to pick up a shoelace, and then they just draw. Right, like that. It's a very vivid scene.
Yeah. When I read Bolaño, I think, to me, that is a man who is telling the kind of history that one could tell of what happened in Calcutta, in the 60s. That seems much more real to me than like a movie like Hazar Chorasi Ki, whatever, not Hazaro Khwahishi I see or whatever, which doesn't seem real to me, in any meaningful sense. But reading Bolaño on Mexico City, and
this is this matter-of-fact writing style of it. It's not particularly romanticized, nor is it like, beating of chest and gnashing of teeth. It's a different tone. That's a reporter.
Yeah. And he also has an understanding of it in the context of the larger history of the place, both before and after. And I think that that's missing. But what I was going to say is that, when I went there and I met, I remember going there as a tourist and meeting the guy who was giving us the tour was this, guy who had actually been there as a student. He had been one of the student protesters. He had survived. But he said, I told my son, like all of us who were here, what did it accomplish? So I told my son, don't get involved in politics. Stay away from this stuff, And I thought that's exactly the kind of reaction that we had as a society, my parents' generation. Whatever side they were on, this is not,
But West Bengal is especially political.
Yeah, but what happened after the Naxalite movement, at least in Calcutta, was very much this sense that, and you see this in the writing of even great writers. Even people like Naman Bhattacharya, who died, a couple of his books have been translated. His book Herbert, which has been translated.
Right. And I think it's been remade into film almost 3 or 4 times now.
Yeah, there's only one film that I've seen yet. So, even a guy like that who's, he was also the son of Mashada Devi, and very good writer. But even in people like him, you see this kind of idea that the Naxalite movement was, even in that book you see it, which is a great book, but yeah, the Naxalite movement is like a dead end,
A mattress stuffed with explosives.
A mattress stuffed with explosives, exactly, right? And the guy who stuffs the mattress is like a Jesus. I mean, it's just like the most innocent man in the world, And so it's like there, but if that dead end hadn't happened, then we could have gone on as a society, that somehow the society was kind of...
It's just the abruptness.
But person, that society ended, like somehow that whatever we were supposed to become, like history ended for us there, and that's a terrible way to, I think.
Kind of depressing?
Yeah. It's a very bad way to think, and it's also just not very productive, because then what happens to the rest of the people?
What does it achieve? To echo your guide, I guess, right? Or
yeah, what did it achieve? And also, like, how are the rest of us? So fine, you want to think this way. What about the rest of us? Like, who came afterwards, right? It's like, it's like living in one of those houses. I don't know if you've ever been to somebody's house where like something terrible happened. Say one of the children died, right? Big family. I mean, I remember going to these kind of, and one of the kids dies, and then the parents act like their lives are over. Meanwhile, there's like 5 other kids, right? And it's like, what about them? You're not going to be a parent anymore to them. You're not going to live your life.
Metaphors
right?
good. That's very packed and very good and very specific.
I feel like I'm into those kinds of problems, But it's a very, problematic way to think about a society, and we're still in that. So that was the impact that I think it had politically. That, after that, yeah, whatever,
It's still echoes. So 2 last questions.
Yeah, sorry.
You got to wind it up. No, it's fine.
I haven't thought through this. This is actually something that I think about a lot. It's not that much in the book because I don't really know how to think through it.
If you're writing a second book, where if you want to go Epic City to
Right.
Electric Boogaloo, the return. Well, this, sure, a shout out would be appreciated. So you've been reporting for a long time at this point. You've been teaching a lot as well, the nature of how urban spaces affect how we remember, how we also report on certain spaces. So. Yeah, like what in India has changed, especially. Like, I mean, I know you had a very specific connection with Calcutta, but like you're in Delhi now, and especially there's more papers, and like there's not just papers, there's new media. There's there's us, there's the Wire, there's the Caravan, there's Scroll. There are all these people doing all this good work, but also through completely different mediums in different ways. I mean, if you want to include like BuzzFeed and Vice and so forth, right? Like, what do you think has changed about that kind of reporting versus
I think
the pencil nub reporting, for want of a better word?
I actually the thing in India always, and actually not in India, I think all over the world, there was also a class dimension to reporting, to newspapers. The better educated people always became editors from the get-go. Out of college, the guys with better degrees, better backgrounds, they always became desk editors. And the people who, in India who would come back with foreign degrees, they would become assistant editors and write the editorials, the things, that you see, China policy.
Well, I was clearly robbed.
Yeah, you're clearly robbed. Yeah, you should have gotten on the ground floor. I mean, maybe new media is different in that sense. Maybe old media, still has those guys sitting around. No, I don't think you were robbed, because I think those are terrible. That's like a job where you go to die, I mean, what are you going to do? Like 25-year-old kid going and writing China policy, like you should be learning about the world. I mean, you know what I mean? Like for me, I feel like that was the best education I could have gotten, going into places where I didn't know anything.
And so you're saying that there's like a giant difference. Like we're opening up that kind of class paradigm currently. It's different now.
It's different in the sense, yes, so you don't have that. But the problem is, I think, that, so reporting was always a low-class thing. It was people who were, the better educated people became editors, did desk. Also because, at least in English papers.
Amazing, I never thought of it that way, but okay.
Also in English papers, there's a whole, dichotomy of people who could write English better. So if you could write English better, you didn't need to write English very well to be a reporter.
Social mobility, right.
Yeah, so if you could write English better, there's no way you were going to be a reporter. You were always going to work desk. I mean, I talk about this a little bit in this kind of dynamic.
Right, that's kind of what I wanted to get at that bit.
But see, now, the thing is, the reason I mentioned this is because one of the things that I think is happening, you see this in TV media. I mean, I remember seeing this myself in Bengal when cable TV first came on. I remember watching TV. Watching TV here was like watching TV in the USSR. I mean, it was like one channel, then it was two channels, and it was like all the news was, ribbon cutting and government committees, and then cable comes in, and all of a sudden
had a lot of Soviet cartoons to
yes, but I was saying news.
Right,
news was just complete propaganda. Then cable comes in, and all of a sudden, all these politicians have to get in front of a camera and answer questions. You know?
You're not being held accountable.
You are now being held
live.
accountable. Yeah. And they would send reporters, if something happened in some district where there's whatever, violence or political violence or somebody kills somebody, they would send a guy with one of those cameras and, and they would report live. And it was an amazingly powerful thing, all of a sudden, to have people held accountable on camera. Now what happened after that is, after I would say maybe a decade of that stuff is expensive to do. You need to send people out, right? It costs money, and it all kind of slowly became studio-based. People, talking heads.
Talking heads, right?
And that whole thing of like
the China policy model again.
Yeah, with a camera, right? And that, I think, is sort of to me it was an amazing thing when TV opened up, because TV was much more democratic than the newspapers in that way. There were many more channels. They were covering much more stuff, particularly outside of cities, I would say, in rural areas. But what I see now is, and it's true in Bengali, it's true in the English media. The cost issue, I think, makes it difficult to sustain that model, and so it's more and more you see less and less reporting, and more just studio thing. And that's really, you need reporting. You need people who are going to go out there and
tell you what they've seen, not what they think they've seen, not analyze, but this is what, back to the famine again, this is what took place.
Happened. Go out and take pictures. And that, I think, is the most honorable. I mean, like I said, I think that's the most important and honorable. If you're an intelligent young person, that's what you should aspire to do. It's a wonderful way to learn about the world in which you live, a society in which you live. I still do that. I mean, I still try to put myself in situations where I don't really know what the hell's going on, and I'm trying to learn and understand.
I think, having to go out of your comfort zone, not just kind of ideologically, but even just physically is just a learning experience.
Yeah,
right?
Go to places where you're not comfortable, and nobody else is going to do that. That's the thing. Like, there's no one
else dumb enough, like a reporter, to go someplace horrible.
Horrible, yeah. It's not going to be a good hotel. It's not, who's going to, there's no other institution that is doing that job, and so I feel, in that way, things have opened up. And I hope that more and more reporting will happen, but it hasn't opened up to in the way that maybe one would have hoped,
Fair. Thanks so much, though, and we're gonna have to wrap it up because, well, I think we've been at this for a while now. So I'm just gonna do a little bit where, anyway. But thank you for coming on here.
Thanks a lot for having me.
The Epic City is out in stores. It is very, very good. But more importantly, the idea of what reporting was, what it is. I mean, I think there's no better snapshot of something like that, right? We're looking at especially in, like Calcutta, I think, which is, still carries on that reputation as this kind of intellectual epicenter of the country, which I'm sure is debated thoroughly. In fact, I'm sure that's a common thing at the Chota Bristol on a daily basis. All right, and that's us from NL Interviews. Thank you for watching. Pay to keep news free, or we're hiring. So if you want to be a reporter, hit us up.